Ambassador Talon stood at the observation deck of Nexus 7, watching the small human ship dock with the massive galactic station. His purple skin rippled with curiosity as he studied the vessel through the transparent metal windows. The human craft looked simple compared to the elegant curves of Vorthak ships or the crystal formations of Zilani transports. Another weak species seeking protection, Talon muttered to himself. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of mild annoyance among his people. For 300 years, the Vorthak Empire had been the strongest military force in the galaxy. They protected smaller civilizations and kept peace through superior strategy and overwhelming firepower. The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss. Talon adjusted his ceremonial robes and walked toward the arrival area. As the military advisor to the Galactic Council, he would observe these newcomers and decide what level of protection they might need. The first human to emerge was tall and walked with steady steps. His uniform was neat but simple, with small metal badges on his chest. Behind him came 3 others, each carrying themselves with quiet confidence that surprised Talon. "I am Captain Juan of the Earth Defense Force," the lead human said, extending his hand toward Council Representative Vex. "Thank you for welcoming humanity to the galactic community." Talon noted how Captain Juan looked directly at each alien representative without fear or disgust. Most new species showed some reaction to the variety of forms in the galaxy. Humans seemed remarkably calm about meeting beings with multiple arms, scaled skin or glowing eyes. "This is Lieutenant Minji, our tactical officer," Captain Juan continued, gesturing to a woman with sharp eyes who nodded politely. "Engineer Dohyun handles our technical systems." The man stepped forward with a friendly smile. "And Medical Officer Sujin oversees health and safety for our crew." The woman called Sujin carried a small bag that Talon recognized as medical supplies. Interesting, most species brought weapons or trade goods to first contact meetings. These humans brought healing equipment. Council Representative Vex began the standard orientation speech. "Welcome to Nexus 7. This station serves as neutral ground for all galactic civilizations. Here you will learn about our laws, our conflicts, and our methods of keeping peace." As they walked through the station corridors, Talon studied the human delegation carefully. They moved in a loose formation that could quickly become defensive if needed, but they kept their hands visible and made eye contact with other species they passed. Professional but non-threatening. The briefing room was large enough to hold representatives from 12 different civilizations. Holographic displays showed star maps, trade routes, and current conflict zones. Captain Juan and his team took seats near the back, listening carefully as Representative Vex explained galactic politics. "The Raider clans attack merchant ships in the outer systems," Vex said, highlighting red zones on the star map. "The Devourer threat grows stronger each year in the northern sectors. Various territorial disputes require constant diplomatic attention." Lieutenant Minji leaned forward slightly. "What are the casualty rates in these conflicts?" Talon found the question odd. Most species asked about victory percentages or resource costs. Humans seemed concerned about losses. "Casualties vary," Representative Vex replied. "The important thing is maintaining galactic stability through superior force and strategic positioning." Engineer Dohyun raised his hand. "Do you have rescue protocols for civilian populations caught in combat zones?" Another strange question. Talon had never heard a new species ask about rescue operations during their first briefing. Most wanted to know about weapons technology or defensive capabilities. "Civilian evacuation is handled case by case," Vex answered, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "Military priorities usually focus on eliminating threats quickly to minimize overall damage." Medical Officer Sujin spoke quietly. "What medical aid is provided to wounded enemies after battles end?" The briefing room fell silent. Talon felt his skin color shift to a darker purple, indicating shock. No species had ever asked about treating enemy wounded. The concept seemed completely foreign to galactic military thinking. Representative Vex struggled for an answer. "Enemy forces are processed according to standard surrender protocols." Captain Juan nodded slowly but said nothing. Talon noticed the human leader exchanging glances with his team. They seemed to be communicating without words, which suggested either telepathic abilities or very close working relationships. The presentation continued with combat simulations. Holographic battles played out in the center of the room, showing how various species handled different threats. The Vorthak scenarios emphasized overwhelming firepower and strategic withdrawal when odds were unfavorable. The Korath examples showed defensive formations designed to minimize losses. The Zelani clips demonstrated their preference for negotiation and peaceful resolution. Now we will observe human combat doctrine, Representative Vex announced. Captain Juan stood. We appreciate the offer, but we prefer not to share tactical information during initial meetings. Perhaps we could discuss general principles instead. Talon was impressed despite himself. The humans were being diplomatic while protecting their military secrets. Smart approach for a new species. We understand that different civilizations have different approaches to conflict, Captain Juan continued. Earth has experienced many wars throughout our history. We have learned that the true measure of victory is not just defeating an enemy, but protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Lieutenant Minji added, We believe that strength should serve justice, not the other way around. Engineer Do-hyun spoke up. Our technology focuses on preservation and rebuilding rather than destruction. We can share some non-military innovations if other species are interested. Medical Officer Sujin opened her supply bag. We brought medical techniques that work on various biological systems. Our doctors have studied alien physiology from your historical records and developed treatments that might help species we have not met before. Talon stared at the medical supplies. The humans had spent time and resources preparing to help aliens they had never seen. This level of preparation for peaceful purposes was unprecedented in his experience. The briefing concluded with standard diplomatic procedures. As the various representatives filed out of the room, Talon lingered behind. He watched Captain Juan and his team gather their materials with efficient, practiced movements. Something about these humans bothered him, though he could not identify exactly what. They seemed unremarkable physically. No natural weapons, no obvious technological advantages, no signs of superior intelligence. Yet their questions and comments suggested a completely different approach to galactic politics and military affairs. Captain Juan noticed Talon observing them. Ambassador Talon, I believe. We look forward to learning more about Vorthak history and culture. Your military achievements are legendary throughout this sector. The compliment was sincere without being flattering. Captain Juan seemed genuinely interested in learning rather than just being polite. Talon found himself responding with unexpected honesty. Your species asks unusual questions, Captain. Most civilizations want to know about weapons and territories. You ask about casualties and medical care. Captain Juan smiled, an expression that seemed both sad and determined. We have learned that wars are easy to start but difficult to end. The real challenge is not winning battles, but building something worth protecting afterward. As the human delegation left the briefing room, Talon remained standing in the empty space. Captain Juan's words echoed in his mind. Building something worth protecting. The Vorthak had never considered that perspective. For the first time in his long career, Ambassador Talon wondered if his people might have something to learn from a species they had dismissed as weak and unremarkable. 3 months after the first meeting, Ambassador Talon found himself aboard the human vessel Indomitable. The ship was smaller than most Vorthak cruisers but felt solid under his feet. Everything was clean and organized, though he noticed the crew moved with a relaxed confidence that seemed unusual for a military vessel. Admiral Kyung welcomed him to the bridge with the same direct handshake he remembered from Captain Juan. The human commander was older, with gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Ambassador, we are honored to have you observe our training exercises, Admiral Kyung said. This will help both our species understand how we might work together in future conflicts. Talon nodded, settling into an observer chair that had been specially modified for his body shape. Around the bridge, human crew members worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Navigator Young-soo plotted courses on a holographic display. Weapons Officer Hiron ran system checks on the ship's armaments. Communications Specialist Jihan monitored radio traffic from other vessels in the exercise area. The training scenario involved protecting a convoy of merchant ships from simulated raider attacks. Standard galactic doctrine would position the fastest warships ahead of the convoy, while heavier vessels provided rear guard support. The Vorthak approach emphasized maintaining overwhelming firepower at all times. Contact bearing 270, reported Young-soo from his station. Multiple raider signatures approaching the convoy. Admiral Kyung studied the tactical display. The enemy force was larger than expected, but still within normal parameters for a training exercise. All ships assumed defensive positions around the merchant vessels. Talon watched as human warships moved to surround the slower convoy ships. This was tactically sound, though it left the human vessels somewhat spread out. A concentrated enemy attack could break through at any weak point. The simulation began with raider ships making probing attacks against the convoy's flanks. Human fighters launched from their carriers, moving in tight formations toward the enemy. Their pilots communicated with short professional reports rather than the elaborate tactical discussions Vorthak crews preferred. Raider Group Alpha engaging our starboard wing, Hyeron announced. They are testing our response patterns. Admiral Kyung remained calm as red warning lights flashed across the bridge displays. Maintain formation. Do not leave the merchant ships exposed. This puzzled Talon. Vorthak doctrine would have launched an immediate counterattack to drive off the raiders while they were still scattered. Instead, the humans seemed content to absorb the enemy probes while keeping their own forces in defensive positions. The exercise continued for 2 hours. Raider attacks grew stronger, but the human fleet held their protective formation around the convoy. Some of their ships took simulated damage, but no merchant vessels were lost. Exercise complete, came the announcement from the command vessel. All units returned to base positions. Talon was preparing to discuss the results with Admiral Kyung when alarms suddenly filled the bridge. Real alarms, not simulation warnings. Admiral, we have actual raiders attacking Sector 7, Jihan reported, her voice tight with urgency. Korath transport Luna's Dream is under attack. They are requesting immediate assistance. The bridge fell silent for a moment. Talon knew that Luna's Dream was carrying Korath refugees from a recent planetary disaster. Nearly 3,000 civilians, mostly families with children. Admiral Kyung looked at the tactical display showing their current position relative to the attack. How long to reach them? 18 minutes at maximum speed, Youngsu calculated. But Admiral, we would be leaving the exercise area without authorization, and our ships are spread out from the training scenario. Talon expected the Admiral to contact Fleet Command for orders. Standard procedure required approval before leaving assigned patrol zones. The Vorthak military had strict protocols about unauthorized movement during joint exercises. Instead, Admiral Kyung turned to his crew. All ships emergency jump to Sector 7, Korath civilians under attack. We are moving to assist immediately. The bridge crew responded without hesitation. Youngsu plotted the jump coordinates while Hyeron brought weapon systems to full readiness. Jihan opened communication channels to coordinate with other human ships. Admiral, Talon said carefully, should you not wait for orders from your command structure? Admiral Kyung looked at him with those calm eyes. Ambassador, those are real people dying out there. Orders can wait. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace in a formation that should have taken much longer to organize. Somehow they had moved from scattered training positions to coordinated battle formation in less than 5 minutes. When they dropped back into normal space near Sector 7, Talon saw the situation was worse than reported. 6 raider ships were attacking the civilian transport while 2 more held off a small Korath escort force. The transport's shields were failing and escape pods were already launching into space. Raiders have superior numbers and firepower, Hyeron reported. Recommend we call for backup before engaging. This was the logical choice. The human ships were outnumbered and had not had time to properly prepare for combat. Vorthak doctrine would be to establish a defensive perimeter and wait for reinforcements. Admiral Kyung studied the display showing escape pods scattered around the damaged transport. Negative. Luna's Dream will not survive long enough for backup to arrive. All ships attack formation. We go in now. Talon felt his skin shift to deep purple as the human fleet accelerated directly toward the superior enemy force. This was not tactics. This was not strategy. This was something his people would call madness. The battle began immediately. Raider ships turned from the transport to face the human attack, their heavier weapons finding targets among the smaller human vessels. The first human ship took critical damage within minutes, but instead of withdrawing, it continued firing while maneuvering to shield the civilian transport. Hull breach on Deck 7, came a damage report over the communication system. Engineering team responding. Talon listened to the calm voices of human crew members reporting battle damage as if they were discussing weather conditions. No panic, no fear in their voices, just professional focus on their duties. Admiral Kyung stood at the center of his bridge, watching the tactical display as his ships engaged a superior enemy force in order to protect aliens they had never met. When Talon asked why, the Admiral's answer was simple. Because they cannot protect themselves and we can help them. The battle raged for 30 minutes. 3 human ships took severe damage, but no raiders broke through to finish off the transport. When Galactic Council reinforcements finally arrived, they found human crews working alongside Korath civilians to rescue survivors from damaged escape pods. Talon watched Medical Officer Sujin treating wounded raiders with the same care she gave to human casualties. He realized he was seeing something his strategic mind could not properly categorize. Beings who chose to help others even when it served no tactical advantage. That night, as he prepared his report on human military capabilities, Talon found himself struggling to explain what he had witnessed. The humans had won, but not through superior strategy or overwhelming force. They had won through something the Vorthak military manuals had no name for. Later, he would understand that he had watched humans face battle unflinchingly, not because they felt no fear, but because they had decided that fear did not get to make the choice. 6 months later, Ambassador Talon stood in the command center of Kepler 442b, staring at tactical displays that showed impossible numbers. The agricultural world fed 3 star systems and housed 2.3 million beings from 12 different species. Now it was about to become a graveyard. The Devourers were coming. Talon had studied reports about this species for decades. They consumed other intelligent beings not just for food, but for the knowledge and memories contained in living brains. Entire civilizations had vanished before the Devourer swarms, leaving behind only empty worlds and scattered bones. Devourer fleet detected at jump point 7, announced Major Nara from her position at the sensor station. Her voice remained steady despite the terror in those words. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Colonel Minho stood at the center of the command room, reviewing fleet positions on the holographic display. His human rapid response force consisted of 12 ships against a Devourer swarm that numbered in the hundreds. The math was simple and brutal. Talon had run the calculations 17 times. Each result was the same. Human survival probability, 3%. Civilian evacuation possibility, less than 1%. The logical choice was clear. Colonel, Talon said formally, I must present the tactical analysis. Colonel Minho nodded without looking away from the display. Around the command center, human officers continued their preparations. Captain Junho coordinated with civilian evacuation centers. Lieutenant Una managed communications with the various alien populations on the planet. None of them seemed interested in hearing about mathematical probabilities. Talon activated his portable display unit. Devourer forces outnumber human ships 47-1. Their bioships are larger and better armed than standard vessels. Historical data shows that 96% of civilizations facing similar odds choose strategic withdrawal to preserve military assets for future counterattacks. The command center grew quiet. Several human officers looked toward their colonel, waiting for his decision. Talon expected immediate orders to begin evacuation of essential personnel. Instead, Colonel Minho asked, how many civilians can we evacuate in 4 hours? Major Nara checked her calculations. Maybe 50,000 if we load the transports beyond safe capacity. The rest would have to stay behind. That leaves over 2 million people to face the Devourers alone, Colonel Minho said quietly. Talon felt confusion ripple through his purple skin. Colonel, those numbers support immediate withdrawal. You cannot save them all. Preserving your fleet allows you to return with reinforcements later. Colonel Minho finally turned to look at the Vorthak ambassador. His expression was calm but determined. Ambassador, thank you for the analysis. It confirms what we already knew. The odds are terrible. Then you will begin evacuation procedures? Talon asked hopefully. No. All ships will take defensive positions around the planet. We stay and fight. The command center erupted in activity as officers began implementing defensive strategies. Talon stood frozen, unable to process what he had just heard. The humans were choosing certain death over logical survival. Colonel, I do not understand, Talon said desperately. Your species will gain nothing by dying here. A tactical withdrawal preserves your forces for a better battle. Colonel Minho paused in his orders to look at the alien ambassador. Ambassador, those are not numbers on a display screen. They are families, children, elderly beings who built their lives here believing they were safe. We cannot abandon them. But your deaths will accomplish nothing, Talon insisted. The Devourers will consume the planet regardless. Captain Junho looked up from his evacuation coordination. Maybe they will, maybe they will not. But if we run away, they definitely will. At least this way. We give everyone a chance. Talon watched the human officers continue their preparations. Lieutenant Una was coordinating with alien civilian leaders, explaining evacuation procedures for those too young or old to fight. Major Nara worked with planetary defense systems, setting up ground-based weapons that might slow the Devourer advance. None of them seemed afraid. They joked quietly while checking equipment. They shared pictures of families back on Earth. They acted like beings preparing for a difficult job rather than certain death. "Why are you not afraid?" Talon asked Major Nara when she passed his observation post. She paused, considering the question seriously. "Oh, we are afraid." Terrified, actually. "But fear does not get to make the decision." Those words hit Talon like a physical blow. Fear does not get to make the decision. In Vorthak culture, fear was a tool. Fear kept you alive by preventing stupid choices. Fear made you withdraw when odds were bad and attack when victory was certain. These humans felt the same fear, but chose to ignore it when others needed protection. Colonel Minho activated the planet-wide communication system. His voice reached every settlement, every species, every family on Kepler 442b. "This is Colonel Minho of the Earth Defense Force. We know the Devourers are coming. We know the odds are not in our favor, but we want everyone to understand something important. We are not leaving. We will fight for this world and everyone on it until our last breath." The response was immediate. Alien civilians began volunteering to help with defensive preparations. Korath engineers offered to assist with weapon installations. Zilani medical teams prepared emergency treatment centers. Vorthak families sent messages of gratitude to the human command. Center Talon realized he was witnessing something that violated every principle of military logic his people had developed over centuries of warfare. The humans were inspiring others to be brave simply by refusing to abandon them. As the Devourer fleet approached, Talon found himself in the strange position of hoping the mathematical analysis was wrong. Not because he had developed affection for humans, though he was beginning to respect them, but because he was starting to understand that some choices were more important than survival. The first Devourer scouts appeared on the sensor screens 2 hours early. Colonel Minho studied the readings with his senior staff, making final adjustments to their defensive plan. "They are larger than expected," Major Nara reported. "Biological scans show they have been feeding recently. They are stronger than normal." Colonel Minho nodded. "Signal all ships. Prepare for battle." Talon watched the human commander check a small photograph in his uniform pocket. A family picture, the ambassador realized. Wife and children waiting back on Earth. Colonel Minho was choosing to die far from home to protect strangers he had never met. As the human fleet moved into position around Kepler 442b, Talon finally understood why their earlier questions about casualties and medical care had seemed so strange. Humans did not fight to win battles. They fought to protect people. Victory was just a tool for that purpose, not the goal itself. The Devourer swarm filled the outer system, their bioships pulsing with hungry energy. Soon they would begin their attack, and Talon would see if human courage could overcome impossible odds. Deep in his mind, the Vorthak ambassador found himself hoping that mathematics could be wrong. Not because he believed in miracles, but because he was beginning to believe that some things were worth dying for, even when dying accomplished nothing logical. The battle for Kepler 442b was about to begin, and for the first time in his life, Talon was afraid of watching beings he respected choose death over surrender. The Devourer swarm blotted out the stars. Ambassador Talon had seen many battles, but nothing prepared him for this sight. Hundreds of bioships stretched across space like living nightmares, their organic hulls pulsing with digestive acids and neural networks harvested from consumed civilizations. Each vessel was larger than a human cruiser, and infinitely more terrifying. "Devourer fleet entering engagement range," reported Lieutenant Yunha from her communications station. Her voice carried across the human command center with the same calm professionalism Talon had come to recognize. No trembling, no panic, just facts delivered clearly. Colonel Minho stood before the tactical display, watching death approach his tiny fleet. 12 human ships against an ocean of alien horror. The colonel's expression remained steady as he gave his final orders. "All ships weapons free. Protect the civilian evacuation transports as long as possible. Make them pay for every meter. What happened next would haunt Talon for the rest of his life. Sergeant Dong Ho's voice came over the Marine communication channel, audible throughout the command center. Well, boys and girls, looks like we drew the short straw today. Anyone got any good jokes before we get eaten by space monsters? Laughter. Actual human laughter filled the radio frequencies as Marines aboard the various ships began sharing jokes and funny stories. Talon's purple skin darkened with shock. These beings were making jokes while facing creatures that had devoured entire star systems. Pilot Seo Young's fighter squadron launched from the carrier, their small craft racing toward bioships that could swallow them whole. Over the squadron frequency, Talon could hear her humming something soft and musical. "Seo Young, what is that song?" asked another pilot. "Something my daughter taught me," she replied, still humming as she armed her weapons. "She said it brings good luck. Figure we need all the luck we can get." The first wave of devourers attacked with their traditional terror tactics. Bioships released clouds of smaller organisms designed to overwhelm enemy sensors and create panic among defending crews. The creatures screamed across communication frequencies, filling space with sounds of digestion and consumption. Lieutenant Chanwu's fighter squadron dove directly into the biological swarm. Instead of the terror response the devourers expected, the human pilots began singing. The same battle hymn Talon had heard months earlier, now rising over the alien screams with defiant harmony. "What are they doing?" Talon asked Major Nara, unable to understand what he was witnessing. "Singing," she replied simply, as if this was the most natural response to facing cosmic horror. "Helps keep everyone focused." Talon watched through the sensor displays as human fighters engaged bioships hundreds of times their size. Seo Young's squadron used tactics that made no mathematical sense. Diving through digestive clouds that should have dissolved their ships instantly, they fired at specific nerve clusters, targeting biological weak points that should have been impossible to identify in the chaos of battle. "How do they know where to aim?" Talon demanded. Captain Junho looked up from his evacuation coordination. "Medical Officer Sujin studied devourer biology for months after we first heard they might attack. She shared the weak point data with all our pilots." The Vorthak ambassador felt another shock of realization. While his people had spent months calculating retreat scenarios, the humans had spent the same time learning how to fight an enemy they hoped never to face. They had prepared for this battle even while hoping it would never come. The human cruiser Defiant took massive damage from a cluster of bioships, its hull breached in 17 places. Standard military procedure called for immediate evacuation of the damaged vessel. Instead, the crew rerouted all remaining power to weapons and continued firing. "Defiant, your ship is breaking apart," Major Nara called over the communication system. "Evacuate immediately." "Negative, Command," came the reply from Captain Inho. "We still have weapons and there are still civilians down there. Defiant remains in the fight." Talon watched in fascination and horror as the damaged ship continued engaging devourer bioships, even while its own hull collapsed around the crew. The humans were not just willing to die for strangers. They were eager to make their deaths as costly as possible for the enemy. Medical Officer Sujin, now serving as chief medical for the entire fleet, established treatment centers on 3 different ships. But she was not just treating human casualties. Talon observed through security feeds as she worked to save wounded devourer organisms that had been captured during fighter sweeps. "Why are you healing the enemy?" Talon asked her during a brief communication window. Dr. Sujin looked up from a bioform she was operating on, her hands covered in alien fluids. "Because understanding how they heal might help us save our own people. And because every being deserves medical care, even enemies." This made no tactical sense. The captured devourers would provide no intelligence value, and treating them used resources needed for human casualties. Yet somehow, watching Dr. Sujin save enemy lives seemed to strengthen the morale of human troops throughout the fleet. The battle continued for hours. Human ships disappeared one by one into the biological swarm, but each loss came at enormous cost to the devourer forces. Lieutenant Chanwu's squadron sang their battle hymn even as their fighter craft were dissolved by digestive acids. Sergeant Dongho's Marines continued making jokes over the radio as they fought boarding actions inside the hull breaches of their own ships. Colonel Minho's flagship took critical damage when 3 bioships targeted it simultaneously. The command center filled with smoke and emergency alarms, but the human officers remained at their stations. Hull breach in the medical bay. Lieutenant Yunha reported. Fire in the engineering section. Weapon systems operating at 30%. Can we still fight? Colonel Minho asked calmly. Yes, sir. Weapons are still online. Then we continue. Talon realized that he was witnessing something his species had no experience with. The Vorthak fought when victory was probable and withdrew when it was not. These humans were fighting without any hope of victory, simply because withdrawal would doom the civilians they had sworn to protect. As the battle raged around Kepler 442b, Talon began to understand why human tactics seemed insane to other species. They were not trying to win according to normal military definitions. They were trying to make victory so expensive for the enemy that future attacks would become less likely. Each human ship that died took dozens of bioships with it. Each pilot who sang while facing death inspired others to fight harder. Each joke shared over the radio frequencies reminded everyone that they were not just soldiers, but people fighting for other people. The mathematics had been clear from the beginning. The humans would lose this battle. But as Talon watched their ships disappear one by one into the biological swarm, he began to realize that victory and defeat might not be the same thing for humans as they were for other species. When Colonel Minho's ship finally succumbed to the swarm, the last transmission from the human fleet was not a cry of despair or a request for mercy. It was Pilot So-young, her fighter craft dissolving around her, still humming the song her daughter had taught her. Talon found himself hoping that the little human girl would somehow know that her silly song had given courage to warriors facing the darkness between stars. That her mother had died singing it while protecting people she had never met. As the Devourer swarm moved toward the planet's surface, Talon prepared to witness the final horror. But something had changed in the biological fleet. They moved more slowly now, their formations disrupted by the losses they had taken. For the first time since the battle began, Talon wondered if the humans might have accomplished something impossible after all. The human fleet was gone. Ambassador Talon stood in the planetary command center, watching sensor displays that showed empty space where 12 human ships had fought against impossible odds. The Devourer swarm continued toward Kepler 442b, but something was wrong with their formation. The bioships moved erratically, their usual coordinated hunting patterns disrupted. Remaining Devourer forces at 70% strength, reported the surviving communications officer, a young Korath named Vel, who had taken over when Lieutenant Yuna's ship was destroyed. They have taken heavier losses than any previous engagement in recorded history. Talon studied the tactical readings. The mathematics were still brutal but no longer completely hopeless. The human sacrifice had changed the equation from impossible to merely desperate. Incoming transmission, Vel announced. It is from the damaged human cruiser Resilient. The main display screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a ship that should have been destroyed hours ago. Captain Ji-hoon stood among sparking control panels and emergency lighting, his uniform torn but his expression determined. Planetary Command, this is Resilient. We are still operational and ready to continue the fight. Talon stared at the transmission in shock. That vessel was reported destroyed. How is this possible? Captain Ji-hoon smiled grimly. Reports of our destruction were slightly exaggerated. We have hull breaches in 60% of our sections and no main engines, but weapons are still online. Requesting permission to ram the Devourer command ship. The request hung in the air like a physical blow. Talon had studied human military records for months, but he was still not prepared for their casual approach to ultimate sacrifice. Captain, that is a suicide mission, Talon said over the communication link. Yes, sir, it is, Captain Ji-hoon agreed cheerfully. But their command bioship coordinates the entire swarm. If we can take it out, the rest might scatter long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Through the ship's internal cameras, Talon could see the human crew making final preparations. They moved with calm efficiency, checking systems and securing loose equipment. No one seemed afraid. Several crew members were actually joking with each other as they prepared to die. Captain, you have families waiting for you, Talon said desperately, trying to understand their mindset. This sacrifice serves no logical purpose. Captain Ji-hoon paused in his preparations to look directly at the camera. Ambassador, my daughter is 7 years old. When she asks what her father did during the war, I want to be able to tell her that I protected people who needed help, even if those people were not human. The transmission ended as Resilient began its final approach to the Devourer command ship. Talon watched the tactical display as the damaged cruiser accelerated toward the massive biovessel, its remaining weapons firing continuously. But the sacrifice was not happening in isolation. Across the planet's surface, other humans were making similar choices. Engineer Do-Yun had been working in the main power station when Devourer ground forces landed. Instead of evacuating with the other technical staff, he remained at his post to keep the planetary shields operational. When bioorganisms began dissolving the reactor containment, he sealed himself inside the control room and continued working. Power grid holding at 90%, came his voice over the planetary communication system.
Shields are stable.
I can give you maybe 20 more minutes before the reactor overloads. 20 minutes. Talon knew that Engineer Do-Yun was trading his life for 20 minutes of additional protection for the civilians in the evacuation. Shelters.communications. Specialist Jihan had survived the destruction of her ship only to find herself stranded on an asteroid mining station with 47 alien refugees. Devourer scout ships were approaching the station, drawn by the life signs of the trapped civilians. Instead of hiding or surrendering, Jihan activated the station's emergency beacon and began broadcasting continuously on all frequencies. This is Communications Specialist Jihan of the Earth Defense Force. We have civilians here who need evacuation. Any friendly ships in the area, please respond. The broadcast drew the Devourer scouts directly to her position, but it also alerted a passing Galactic Council patrol to the refugee situation. Talon realized that Jihan was choosing to make herself a target in order to save people she barely knew. Navigator Youngsu had been badly injured when his ship was destroyed, but he managed to reach an escape pod with sensor equipment still functional. Instead of using the pod to reach safety, he positioned himself between the planet and the Devourer swarm, sending detailed tactical information to the surface defenders. Devourer Group 7, changing course toward Evacuation Site 12, came his weak voice over the communication system. Recommend immediate civilian relocation to secondary shelters. Each piece of information came at the cost of revealing his own position to enemy forces. Navigator Youngsu was choosing certain death to provide intelligence that might save a few more lives. Talon found himself physically shaking as he witnessed these individual acts of sacrifice. Each human was making the same impossible choice, trading their own survival for the slim chance that others might live a little longer. Medical Officer. Sujin had established a field hospital in one of the deep evacuation bunkers. When Devourer organisms broke through the outer defenses, she refused to evacuate her patients. Alien civilians, human refugees, even wounded enemy bioforms received the same level of care. I took an oath to do no harm and to preserve life, she said when asked why she stayed behind. That oath does not specify which species deserves medical care. As the bunker was overrun, Dr. Sujin continued treating patients even while bioorganisms consumed the walls around her. Her final transmission was a complete medical database of Devourer biology, information that might help future defenders treat exposure to their digestive compounds. Each sacrifice tore at something deep in Talon's understanding of rational behavior. His own species would call these actions wasteful, counterproductive, strategically unsound. The humans were throwing away lives that could be preserved for future battles. But as the reports continued coming in, Talon began to see a pattern that his strategic training had not prepared him to recognize. The human sacrifices were not random or pointless. Each death bought time or information or inspiration that helped others survive a little longer. Captain Jihoon's ramming attack had disrupted the Devourer command structure. Engineer Do-Yun's final 20 minutes allowed 3,000 more civilians to reach deep shelters. Communications Specialist Jihan's sacrifice led to the rescue of 47 refugees. Navigator Youngsu's intelligence reports helped defenders redirect evacuation routes away from enemy forces. Individually, each sacrifice seemed mathematically insignificant. Together, they were changing the entire nature of the battle. Talon realized he was witnessing something his people had no name for. The humans were not just willing to die for strangers. They were transforming their deaths into weapons that could protect life itself. As the final phase of the battle approached, Talon found himself hoping for something he had never believed possible. Not that the humans would survive, The mathematics made that impossible. But that their sacrifices would somehow matter in the end. That when the counting was finished and the dead were buried, someone would remember that beings who barely knew each other had chosen to die, rather than abandon those who needed protection. The communication board lit up with final messages from the last human survivors scattered across the system. Not cries for help or pleas for mercy, but calm reports of tactical positions and gentle farewells to families they would never see again. Talon listened to each voice and understood that he was hearing something that would change him forever. The sound of courage so pure that it hurt to witness. Silence. For the first time in 3 days, Ambassador Talon could not hear weapons fire or emergency alarms or the dying screams of bioships dissolving in space. The battle for Kepler 442b was over, and somehow, impossibly, the planet still existed. He stood in the ruins of the planetary command center, staring at sensor displays that showed scattered devourer forces retreating toward the outer system. Not destroyed but broken, not defeated, but unwilling to continue paying the price for victory. Final casualty reports, announced the surviving communications officer. Vell's voice carried exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. Human military forces total loss. Estimated civilian casualties 400,000. Survivors 1.9 million. The numbers should have felt like defeat. By any logical measure, the humans had lost. Their fleet was gone. Their military leadership dead, their defensive positions overrun. Yet Talon could not escape the feeling that he had witnessed something that transcended normal definitions of victory and defeat. A damaged shuttle landed outside the command center, carrying the only surviving human officer. Admiral Kyung emerged from the craft, his uniform burned and his left arm in an improvised sling. But his eyes still carried that same calm determination Talon remembered from their first meeting. "Admiral," Talon said, struggling to find appropriate words. "I am sorry for your losses." Admiral Kyung nodded quietly. "They died well, each of them. I could not ask for more than that." Over the following days, Talon watched something that challenged his understanding of post-battle behavior. The surviving humans did not mourn their defeat or demand resources for their own recovery. Instead, they immediately began working to help the alien civilians who had survived the attack. Human engineers worked alongside Korath technicians to restore power to damaged settlements. Human medical personnel shared their remaining supplies equally among all species, treating alien wounded before addressing their own injuries. Human pilots flew evacuation missions for elderly Zalani, who could not reach the temporary shelters on their own. "Why do you help them?" Talon asked Dr. Sujin's replacement, a young medic named Hyejin who had arrived with the relief forces. "Your own people need medical attention." Dr. Hyejin looked up from a Vorthak child she was treating for exposure to devourer digestive compounds. "Because they need help and we can provide it." "Is there another reason we should need?" Talon realized that the humans were not helping alien survivors as part of some diplomatic strategy or political calculation. They helped because helping was what they did. It was as natural to them as breathing. Admiral Kyung established his temporary headquarters in a damaged school building that had served as an evacuation shelter. Instead of focusing on military reconstruction, he spent his time coordinating relief efforts for all species on the planet. When Talon asked about rebuilding human military capabilities, the Admiral's response was simple. "The people come first. Military strength means nothing if there are no people left to protect." 3 weeks after the battle, Galactic Council reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. Fleet Admiral Zorth of the Hegemony Navy surveyed the aftermath with obvious confusion. His tactical reports showed a human defeat, yet the surviving population spoke of human victory. "I do not understand these casualty reports," Admiral Zorth told Talon during a private briefing. "The humans lost every ship and most of their personnel. How can the civilians claim this was a successful defense?" Talon found himself struggling to explain something he was still trying to understand. "The humans did not fight to preserve their own forces, Admiral. They fought to preserve life itself. By that measure, they succeeded. But their military assets were completely destroyed," Admiral Zorth insisted. "No rational species would accept such losses for so little strategic gain." "Perhaps that is why they won," Talon replied quietly. In his personal quarters that night, Talon began writing his final report on human military capabilities. The words came slowly, each sentence forcing him to confront ideas that challenged everything he had believed about warfare and survival. The humans had faced an enemy that outnumbered them 50-1, using tactics that violated every principle of sound military strategy. They had chosen certain death over tactical withdrawal. They had treated enemy wounded while their own people were dying. They had shared resources with alien civilians while their own forces went without supplies. By every logical measure, their behavior had been irrational, wasteful, and strategically unsound. Yet they had achieved something that no other species in galactic history had accomplished. They had made the Devourers retreat through sheer force of will and sacrifice. Talon wrote, "Human military doctrine appears based on principles that our strategic models cannot properly evaluate. They do not fight to win battles in the traditional sense. They fight to preserve and protect life, treating their own survival as secondary to that primary mission." He paused, thinking of Captain Jihoon ramming his damaged ship into the Devourer command vessel while joking with his crew, of Engineer Do-hyun staying at his post while bioorganisms consumed the walls around him, of Dr. Sujin treating enemy wounded while her own hospital was being overrun. The humans possess something that I can only describe as weaponized compassion. They turn their capacity for caring into a force that enemy calculations cannot account for. When faced with impossible odds, they do not ask what they can survive. They ask what they can save. A month after the battle, Talon received permission to remain on Kepler 442b as Permanent Galactic Council liaison. The official reason was to oversee reconstruction efforts, but the real reason was more personal. He needed to understand how beings could face annihilation unflinchingly and somehow transform that courage into victory. He watched human survivors work 16-hour days rebuilding not just their own homes, but entire neighborhoods for alien families. He saw human children sharing their food rations with Korath younglings whose parents had been lost in the battle. He observed human elderly teaching traditional crafts to Zalani refugees who had lost everything. The humans rebuilt their world not as a human colony, but as a home for all species who had survived together. When new settlements were planned, they included architectural styles from 12 different civilizations. When schools reopened, they taught the histories and cultures of all galactic species as equal subjects. "Why do you do this?" Talon asked Admiral Kyung during one of their regular meetings. "You could build a purely human world. It would be more efficient." Admiral Kyung looked out the window at children from 6 different species playing together in the rebuilt school playground. "Ambassador, we did not fight and die to create a human world. We fought to create a better world. That means a world where everyone belongs." 6 months later, Talon completed his assignment on Kepler 442b and prepared to return to Vorthak space. His final report to the Galactic Council would reshape military thinking throughout the galaxy. But his personal transformation went much deeper. On his last day, the human survivors gathered to thank him for his service during the reconstruction. Representatives from every species on the planet attended the ceremony, but it was the human gesture that moved him most. They had created a memorial garden for all who died defending the world. Every name was carved in stone, human and alien alike, with no distinction between species or military rank. At the center stood a simple inscription in the common galactic language. They chose to stand when standing seemed impossible. Admiral Kyung presented Talon with a small piece of metal recovered from the wreckage of Captain Jihoon's ship. "So you remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than fear." As Talon's transport lifted off from Kepler 442b, he looked down at a world that should have been a graveyard, but had become a symbol of hope. The humans had lost everything by conventional measures, yet they had won something far more valuable. They had proven that compassion could be stronger than mathematics, that sacrifice could be more powerful than strategy, that love could triumph over logic. In his personal log, Talon wrote his final thoughts about humanity. "I came to study their military capabilities and learned instead about the strength that comes from caring more about others than about yourself. I watched humans face battle unflinchingly, and it tore through me because I realized that true courage is not about being unafraid. It is about being afraid and choosing to act anyway because someone else needs you to. They do not fight unflinchingly because they are fearless. They fight unflinchingly because they have decided that fear does not get to make the choice, and in that decision lies a power that can reshape the galaxy itself." The transport entered hyperspace, carrying Talon home to a people who would never fully understand what he had learned. But somewhere in the growing darkness between stars he smiled, knowing that the universe contained beings who would choose to light a candle rather than curse the darkness, even when lighting that candle might cost them everything.